Welcome to BowlerStudio. BowlerStudio is a design tool to make the process of designing and building robots easy. The main structure of the application is a web browser where all of your tutorials, all the information about how the system works, lives, and a framework of libraries that you can call with code. The code is presented in the browser using little blobs of code right embedded into the website. These are called GitHub gist. In the background, they're Git repositories. BowlerStudio, when looking at a web page that contains a gist, sees that there is code there, sees it as something that it can download, downloads it, compiles it, and makes it ready to run for the user, which means all of the code examples are themselves executable.
Welcome to BowlerStudio.
The ability for a user to change languages is as simple as looking at a different example language or running a different script that has a file extension of a different language and running the new language.
Scripts in Clojure.
Clojure is a language that is based on Common Lisp, but it runs on the JVM. It's very fast. Python is a very common language for introductory development. New users use Python quite often, but it is a bit slower. Quite a bit slower.
You can write scripts in Python.
Moving on, we write code that creates shapes. This library called JCSG is built into a system that presented to the user called JavaCAD. JavaCAD allows you to write code and get shapes to pop out. So when you look at a tutorial example in BowlerStudio, if that tutorial contains some objects that get returned to the screen, after you run the code, the CAD will pop up in a 3D window built into BowlerStudio. The 3D window lets you view all of your objects. You can double-click on objects to navigate around. And at any point, you can make a copy of the script. Since I own the scripts in the tutorials, mine says edit. If you didn't own the script, as a user would not, your button will say make a copy. And when you click that button, it'll bring up the code. Now that the code's popped up, you can do something interesting with this code that you wouldn't necessarily expect. As you move your cursor around the screen, once it highlights a line of code that creates a shape on the screen, that shape highlights itself in yellow and brings the focus to it. For a cleaner example, here's our rounded cube, and then a cylinder, or sorry, the sphere, cylinder, polygon, and so on and so forth. If you're looking at a bunch of objects on the screen and don't know how they were created from the code, you can right-click on an object and read the source. This will highlight in red all the lines of code used to create this object. Down at the bottom, here, up here, and again there. What we do with this code is actually make whole robots. So you can grab from the creature menu a whole selection of different robots that are example robots, things that you can just load and start working. My favorite is Carl the Hexapod. So as you can see, the robot will design itself on the fly. The robot that's being built right now is described generally with a static configuration file, and then BowlerStudio takes that file and uses it to create the robot on the fly. At any given time, you can tell it to start walking, and the robot will figure out how to make itself walk. And load it. There we go. So now we have a robot that we can tell to walk around, and if we wanted to see it walk in physics simulation, we just sort of click on the physics simulation and run it. Boop. And from there, when we make the robot walk, instead of it just flailing around in air, it'll actually interact with the ground and create a physics-based robot. Look at it go. Hey, and we're done. The robot has redesigned itself, and here's what we're going to do. Show you how to take one of the limbs, pick a link. Let's try this one. Expand it out and just say, hey, I would like it for this link to be longer. All you gotta do is drag that slide bar, the link gets longer, and the system will redesign the robot to match whatever it is you said you want it to be. Look at that. More CAD. Adorable. Now, if you wanted to imagine what it might look like if this robot with its new leg could walk, you just hit the button and you can see it moving around. To see it in the physics simulation, just run the physics simulation again. And from there, anything you do to the robot becomes something you can simulate and validate live at runtime. Cool. Now, let's imagine we wanted to take some parts, some other obstacles, and dump them on our robot's head and see how well it does. All you have to do is pop over to the next step in the tutorial and go ahead and run it. Hey, there it goes. There you go. So now we got a bunch of stuff in the scene for the robot to kick around. And once it starts moving, you can see it interacting with all the little objects. These are the objects from the example script. So there you go. That's how you go from code to robot to simulation, all in one application. Once you have your simulated robot and you want to connect it to real hardware, all you have to do is plug in an Arduino, and BowlerStudio can write code and push it to the Arduino. This means that your robot now can have a physical presence in the real world as well as a simulated robot on the screen. So all just as simple as looking at a .ino in the tutorials and running it just like any other script.